Welcome back, Inside Carolina Live. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Joey Powell still in the transfer portal on spring break with the rest of the partiers. Got Dewey Burke with me. Dewey Burke, as you know, if you listen to this Inside Carolina Live, if you listen to our Inside Carolina podcasts on the regular, is a regular featured post-game analyst. Dewey also provides content for the message boards and all, and just all around asset to Inside Carolina. Dewey, I'm going to get you in here and I'm going to get right to it. North Carolina season certainly not up to expectations. Hadn't really talked to you a lot since it ended. Have you had time to process what has happened over the last 6 months around the North Carolina basketball program?
I think I have, and I would take it longer than 6 months. I take it from the day after the Kansas loss all the way through today, has been a pretty wild emotional roller coaster for fans, people on the Inside Carolina message boards, for former players, for the actual players and staff, and um, boy, it's challenging when you come up so short of expectations. We had such high hopes, such good feelings about this team and these kids coming back based on the ride they took us on. And one of the things I did in preparation for this time was I went and watched a couple of our podcasts from last year's tournament run. And we spoke after the St. Peter's game when they made the Final Four. And I sat right on this medium and said, this is the most remarkable thing I've seen since I've been a part of the program. That this team and these kids are in the Final Four. It was the most remarkable thing I'd seen. Just because it was so unexpected, 8 seed, the way the regular season, they didn't really play great until much later in the year. And so you just had every expectation that they could carry that into this year, but with a chip on their shoulder because they didn't finish the job. And it just wasn't that way. There wasn't a sense of urgency. There wasn't a chip. There wasn't us against the world mentality to get back to the mountaintop like that 2017 team did, like that 2009 team did. We're going to get into it and talk about why, playing style, the meshing of the kids, no Brady Manic. I understand all that, but that for me was always the hardest thing when we had these conversations. Was I just can't understand why they're not, as Coach Williams would say, ripping the nails out of the floor to get back where they were, to try to take the last step and hang a banner and be legends. And you just never saw that. You never saw that urgency, that effort, and that's hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to get because it's so foreign from my experience. We lost games. We got knocked out in the second round of the tournament when Tyler and those guys were freshmen, and we collapsed and lost to Georgetown in the Elite Eight. That's what happened. But man, there were at least a number of guys on those teams that just they'd have died for the win. They'd have died for it. I just don't know that. I just don't know that I saw that. So I could keep going, but let me let you ask me questions. So that to sum it all up, the disappointment that these guys didn't play like they'd ripped the nails out of the floor was hard to watch.
Yeah, and my inclination listening to you talk, and we're speaking with Dewey Burke, of course, former North Carolina Tar Heel himself, and he mentioned 2006, 2007, 2008, even the Final Four Kansas game leading up to that 2009 championship. But my inclination is to ask, what has changed within the program, within these players to cause that? But I don't know if it's quite that simple. I don't know if it's an answer that you have. I don't know if it's an answer you've even thought about. I mean, it still means a lot. It still means as much to these guys, you would think. But without sort of calling out specific players, are we just in a different age where what you spoke of, ripping the nails out, is not as big a thing anymore. And then I look at other teams, and I've watched the tournament thus far. I watched Furman beat Virginia by ripping the nails out of the floor and coming up with a miracle. I've watched, other teams do it. I just struggle to find rationale and reason, and I wonder from your perspective, can you find any to understand why that is the case in Chapel Hill right now?
No, and it's even more puzzling because of what we just discussed, is that they were a rebound away, a turned ankle away, a couple shots away from winning a national championship. Now, had they won the national championship, this same team doesn't come back. There are different players and all, okay, understood. But they didn't win it. But like we talked about all year, they tasted it. They were right there. Um, and so to not have that want to, it seems, I do not understand. I can't identify with that. Not just because of, I'm not saying this because it's like that's how I felt, right? Because I didn't play, right? I tried my darndest in practice, but that was my job. But the guys I played with, not all of them, but most of them, man, there just was a level of effort that I just don't feel like was the same. And we even though it wasn't that long ago, it's getting longer and longer. But in 2006, 2007, no social media. I mean, we got kicked out of school for the stuff we did out on Franklin Street today, right? But nobody was taking pictures of us. We just did, right? Um, Now these guys people are taking pictures of them, pictures with them. They're, fans, positive and negative, have a direct link to these guys on Instagram and Twitter. None of that existed. So the level of distraction today is certainly much different. But it's also very credible to say it's no different at any other school. Everybody's got the same distractions. It's the same social media. It's the same. So why, why did we play, you could argue, with some sense of entitlement, like we deserved to get back to that, we were just going to arrive in the tournament and then that we could just do that again because we did it last year? I mean, um, there seemed to not be a grasp of the fight, a grasp of the fight that starts in May, right? And you're lifting weights today, that those days, and getting workouts those days to fight for one possession in the ACC tournament against Virginia, or either game against Duke, or at home against Miami, at home against Pitt. Like you, you're fighting and doing the extra sprint and making 10 more free throws for 1 inch, one possession. Like you do one extra set with Jonas because it gets you ready for 1 inch, and it just never felt like we won that inch this year, this team.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've heard football players a lot talk about the inch, winning just an inch. It can make all the difference in the world. So it's a good reference there. You have talking about this team. I won't. I freely admit, and you and I have talked a lot, and it's exhausting when they lose. I know you feel it more than I do. A lot of people have said, "How can you continue to talk about it?" And quite frankly, I'm tired of talking about it. But it remains in the news and it remains relevant for everybody because it is Carolina basketball, especially here in March. Um, where, if I'm honest, watching the tournament these last few days is a little less stressful. Not having
Yeah.
to wonder where Carolina's going and all that. So, at any rate, and somebody asked on the message board soon after Virginia lost, would you rather be Virginia or North Carolina at that moment? And you take Virginia every second, no matter who they lose to or what they lost to, whatever they were, seeded wise. But anyway, I digress. Dewey, let me ask you about this, and this sort of been the elephant in the room the last few days, and I am going to turn a little bit positive before we get out of here. But the NIT decision, for the life of me, and I've talked about it with multiple people, multiple former players, and certainly enough on Inside Carolina. I can't for the life of me understand why they would turn that down, no matter what's going on in Chapel Hill. It's just too big of opportunity to, 1, play and get experience, 2, for players to put that uniform on maybe for the last time. That is hard to believe that that opportunity was passed up. What's your take, having been in the arena?
Yeah, so this is obviously a very foreign concept to me, right? I mean, every year I played, we made the tournament. We were, my senior year, we were one seed. We were the number one overall seed after winning the ACC tournament, right? So I mean, that to where this team, so there's a chasm there. Um, so I cannot speak from any kind of experience on what it must have felt like to not even have a party at the head coach's house to watch Selection Sunday, because that never happened. I don't even know. I don't know what that's about. Uh, and so I can't pretend to have. I can't pretend to stand in their shoes and get it that you're not even in. I don't even know what that's like. However, to the point that you made, I also can't fathom not taking the opportunity to put the jersey on. Um, I would tell you confidently that, the guys I'm close with and still in touch with, that not a week or two after we were done, each of us at our various times, we would have we would have practiced. We would have gone to practice if we could, just to still be in it. I'll never forget. I went to late night with Roy the October after I was done, when I graduated. And I was sitting in the stands, a couple rows up, and I was sitting with Jonas. And I remember turning to him saying, I literally am getting lightheaded with how I physically feel right now that I'm not out there with them, that I'm not a part of this. As a walk-on who never did anything on the floor, I had like a physical, whatever you want to call it, a chemical reaction inside me when I turned to Jonas. I said, I literally can't believe I'm not out there with them. And so, and I think all the guys I played with, or almost every guy I played with, would give you some similar story, like that when it was over, they would have done anything just to practice, just to be back together again. And so you think of that, and again, with the caveat that my experience and our experience was very different, I cannot at all understand it, and I never will. Because if you're Pete Nance, if you're Leaky, potentially Armando, obviously I know what everybody's saying, not sure what's going to ultimately happen. But if you're just be Leaky. If you are never putting that jersey on again. And maybe Leaky voted yes. We don't know. But that I can't. Anyway, that's what it reminded me of. When I saw that, I was like, man, I remember watching late night in October 2007 after I was done, and I had a chemical response inside me that I wasn't with my guys, that I wasn't out there, that I couldn't do it again. So that's the best I can give you is how I felt when it was done, and it was devastating.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you when you're talking about it, and I can see it when we've had these conversations. A couple more questions before I let you get out of here. This Dewey Burke, of course, former North Carolina point guard, walk on, but still on the team. That's what I've always laughed at is people say, "Oh, so and so is just a walk on." I'm like, "Yeah, you realize their own Carolina basketball team." I mean,
Yeah, it wasn't any fun. It wasn't any fun at all.
let me ask you this: we've talked a lot about Hubert Davis and the approach, and the transfer portal, and the comings and goings, and Carolina's roster is going to look somewhat different next year, regardless of who's on the team. How difficult is it going to be in your mind for Hubert to sort of get his sea legs back, to get his footing back after a year like this? Or do you think it's just sort of a natural progression for a new coach? And a lot of people have said North Carolina is not a program to get your feet wet coaching. I think Dean Smith did it 60 years ago or however long. But How difficult a process is that going to be for Hubert? Knowing what you know, talking to who you talk to, seems like it's going to be a chore for him to sort of put his stamp back on this program after what happened in year one and then what's happened this past year and now going forward. Seems like a tough job ahead for Coach Davis.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and it's puzzling because it's kind of he's a little bit in reverse, right? I mean, if this year had been last year where we just struggled to gel and we couldn't get it all together and we, struggled offensively, didn't shoot the ball well, and the pieces didn't fit, you'd say, look, new coach, he's following a legend that won 3 national championships. Like, let's give the guy some time and let's, you know, see what he's made of after a little more time. That would have made sense if this year was last year, but then we went and did what we did last year. So the expectations are sky high. And then for it to feel like such a flop makes it extremely challenging to understand where it goes from here because it felt like such a regression um, with many of the same players. And so, um, yeah, look, I think it's a very challenging situation to be in because the expectations don't change here. One of my favorite things to say when people ask about my experience at North Carolina, um, one of my favorite things to talk about is at the first practice every year, Coach Williams got us together and he said, guys, if you do what we tell you to do and we're together and we play the Carolina way and da da da, we have a chance to win the whole blessed thing. Here's the thing though. When we said it, we meant it. It was real. There's only 10 programs that they say that the first practice and it's real. I mean, many of them say it and don't tell me you actually believe it. Don't tell me you actually believe it if you're Virginia Tech or pick your North Carolina. When we say that, we mean it. We mean it. We're here and we do what we're supposed to do and we play well and we go on a run. We're trying to hang a banner, and that's real. And I just don't think many programs say that. And so the expectations will not change for him, and for the staff and for all these guys. So I think whatever it was that was going on, and I don't know, um, for the team to decide they didn't want to play together anymore, NIT or not, speaks to challenges in the locker room, to not being together. And so his first job is to make sure that they're together, in my view. Uh, and then they got to find a way to shoot the ball better, of course. And there are X and O things and on the court, but yeah, sure, they got to get the portal, they got to get some guys that can put the ball in the bat. All of those things are true, but before that, to me, a team that says, "Nah, I don't want to play in the NIT," wasn't together. They just weren't. They couldn't have been. And so that is step one for Coach Davis and the staff is to get these guys back together. I thought it was interesting. You heard him say so many times last year, especially on the run, I've loved coaching this team and how we're together and, ignore all sideshow distractions. And they built around that mantra. And I just didn't feel like it ever got there this year. They never got cohesive. They were never together. It never looked fun. Um, and that they never got gritty together. The weight of it just, it's like it knocked them over. They just never, I don't know. They were not together. And he's got to get them together.
Indeed, he does. And like we talked about, who knows what the roster will ultimately look like, but it doesn't matter. The expectations at North Carolina are going to be very high. I think R.J. Davis caught some flack for saying championship or bust before this prior season. That's the thing every year in Chapel Hill.
That's who we are. That's who we are, guys.
Indeed. That's Dewey Burke. This has been Inside Carolina Live. We'll be right back after the break with Inside Carolina Takeover, Johnny T-shirt Takeover. Join me, Tommy Ashley, Joey Powell, currently in the portal. Let's take a vote. Where should Joey transfer to? Should he come back next week for March 25th show? We'll see. Appreciate it, Dewey, and we'll be right back here on 97.9 The Hill.